You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. Today, things like pond management, electro fishing, and we cover the gamut with Buford Lessley, Fisheries Biologist from MDWFP.
Mississippi Outdoors is sponsored by Entergy Mississippi. Entergy is building a stronger and cleaner grid to power a brighter future and protect our great outdoors for generations to come.
You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt, and today we are joined by Buford Lessley, Fisheries Biologist from MDWFP. Buford, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir.
So you and I were talking, you close to home, right where we sit, you close to home.
Yes, sir. So we moved back over here in 2022. I was raised down at Vidalia, Louisiana, married a girl from Louisville, Mississippi, so we moved right back in the middle.
Okay. Pearl originally, though?
No, sir. We moved from East Texas to Pearl.
Okay, so the other way, so have moved back to Pearl, and that's where you live now.
Yes, sir. So we're about halfway between where I grew up and where she grew up.
Vidalia, Louisiana. I mean, now obviously I think of onions.
That's Georgia.
Okay, so that's Georgia.
Yes, sir.
I got it wrong. What's Vidalia, Louisiana known for?
Jim Bowie had a fight on the sandbar back in the day, was kind of what the town was known for. Other than that, it's Mississippi River being right there. We tell folks when they ask where we're from, Natchez, Mississippi, because most people don't have a clue about Vidalia.
Well, it's right on the other side.
Yes.
So for you, growing up in Louisiana, you mentioned y'all moved to Texas at one point, and to fast forward to Fisheries Biologist. How'd that all happen for you, and where did the interest come from, and where did the light bulb come on for you?
So what really got me interested was growing up. We had Lake St. John, Lake Concordia, Lake Bruin, Old River right there, so we were on the water a lot. The Mississippi River we could see it from the house. If the levee wasn't in the way, you'd actually be able to see the water, but we spent a lot of time on those lakes. We spent a lot of time on what used to be the Red River Wildlife Management Area in Louisiana. I think they call it the Richard Yancey now, where the Chaffalay, Red River, Mississippi River all come together. So we were outside all the time, on the water all the time, fell in love with it from there, and then kind of transitioned to once I got to high school in East Texas, we spent a lot of time on Lake of the Pines, Lake Gladewater, a little bit on Lake Fork. Going to school, really didn't know what I wanted to be, so I kind of took a generalist approach to wildlife and fisheries. Got to my junior year and had a class in fisheries management with Dr. Don Jackson, and that's kind of what hooked me on going the fisheries route.
Fisheries management.
Yes.
And so really, I mean, as a fisheries biologist, that's what you're heavily involved in on a day-to-day basis now, right? It's fisheries management.
Yes, sir. My primary job is fisheries management. We do a little bit of research here and there on the side, but it's primarily managing our large water bodies, state lakes, state park lakes.
Okay. What about private, pond owners and that type of thing? Do they counsel with you? Do you work with them? Yes,
sir. So we have a technical guidance program where we offer advice to landowners. We get a lot of calls, especially this time of year, mainly with vegetation, algae, submerged vegetation, floating vegetation, things like that. We also provide advice as far as stocking rates and population management, whether that's harvesting fish or catch and release, things like that.
Okay. So as we sit now, we're kind of in the middle of the summer as we record this. You mentioned vegetation. So especially like smaller ponds, smaller bodies of water, I'm guessing certain types of vegetation get in it, or algae and other things. It can get out of hand fast.
Yes, sir. So with aquatic vegetation, especially with how warm it was earlier in the year, we saw a real strong uptick in aquatic vegetation growth in our smaller bodies of water. Typically, that's things like water primrose, alligator weed, some submerged stuff, southern naas, coontail, bladderwort. And those really took off, and landowners are having issues with them basically covering entire bodies of water, especially some in that half acre to acre range.
Okay. When you get some of that going on, and I guess it could be different depending on the type of vegetation in a body of water, but like what does a landowner, pond owner begin to do to manage it when it gets to that point?
So with aquatic vegetation, the first step is to get a proper ID. That's where we come in as far as landowners get in touch with us. We ask them to send us some photographs of that plant in the water, out of the water. You can lay it on a toolbox, tailgate, take a picture of it so we can kind of see the leaf structure, stem structure. And then what we do is we provide a treatment recommendation. Mississippi State, along with MDWFP, worked together to publish a book called Southeastern Aquatic Plants. And that's got a really good reference as far as pictures and treatment recommendations geared towards landowners.
Okay. Is there or isn't, I'm thinking about it maybe from the standpoint, let's say, one of the main species in this particular, private body of water is bass, maybe Florida strain, largemouth bass. I mean, isn't there a certain amount of vegetation that, especially from a fishing standpoint, is good? Absolutely.
I mean, for years, the saying was grass equals bass.
Okay.
And, you want some vegetation that's complex cover for fish. It's going to give them something to be able to use for ambush. It's going to also protect some of your smaller fish. However, where it becomes an issue is too much of it is a bad thing because those fish can no longer move freely. There's no real ambush points per se because it's everywhere.
Okay.
And then you can't fish it. That's a big problem we see with a lot of it. It limits access to areas that people want to fish.
Yeah. Now, this may be, again, it's a novice question, but it could be a loaded one. But there's a pretty good sized pond, neighborhood lake close to where I live. And this year I noticed whatever type of vegetation, it was almost like big enough mats of it. And it has stems that it would float around to different parts of the pond. Like you might have one corner that's not covered up today, and the wind gets to blow in the right direction. And the next day, there's that big mat of vegetation over in that corner. It's like it moves around. When you run into that and it's expanding, like what are we talking about there?
So there's several different species that can do that. We see alligator weed. It's an invasive out of South America. It does that. Water primrose mats can break off and float around. The main difference between those two species is the water primrose is going to put on a yellow flower, and then the alligator weed is going to put on a white flower.
Okay.
Alligator weed also has a really interesting aspect where if you take it and you crack the stem, it's going to have a hollow stem.
Okay.
But those two are the primary ones we see that kind of move around like that. Some other species are water hyacinth. It's an invasive, came into Louisiana in the 1800s, and it puts on a real pretty purple flower. A lot of people use it in water gardens, things like that, but once they realize it's overtaken, they release it, and then it becomes a major issue.
Okay. So if it's an invasive thing that doesn't originate here, how does it wind up in some isolated pond or body of water like in my neighborhood in Tupelo? How does it get there?
And also, what makes those species of plants successful here?
So with something like water hyacinth, it came into Louisiana, and it's kind of been moved around. Human transport's a big one. It gets on somebody's boat, somebody's equipment, gets moved. That's where the Clean Drain Dry program comes in, trying to stop that spread. What makes these plants so successful is that they kind of fill a niche. We really don't have many floating species of aquatic vegetation, besides duckweed. So they're able to kind of move around. They can go with the flow, essentially, and end up getting in different areas. From an invasion standpoint, the issue stems from them getting into areas that you can't get to. They'll slide under a downed tree or into a cypress swamp and get in those backwaters to where they can thrive there.
Yeah. And then I guess it's a deal where depending on where they are, if it's not dealt with, then it's just going to continue to get worse. It doesn't get better on its own.
Correct. Basically. Yes, sir. They outcompete everything. Water hyacinth has the ability to shade out other species and create these mats that we get over in the Delta. Horseshoe Lake at Chula, for example, is one. We had so much water hyacinth over there. There were areas we couldn't even take an airboat.
Really?
And it'll get 3-4 foot tall and be a free floating mat and essentially block access completely.
How about that?
Okay, so I have another question on that note. So these invasive species that come here and they're successful because there's nothing that's in their little niche, do they have things that are competing against them where they're actually from, or like do they have something that's eating it? Like is something in South America eating water hyacinth or competing
or controlling
with it? Or controlling it? Yeah.
So with like Salvinia, water hyacinth in South America, they get large flood events that really push this stuff out.
Okay.
Alligator weed has a flea that they use that can control it in some of our lower latitudes, but we can't typically use it up here because it's not cold tolerant. Salvinia has a weevil that does similar work.
It's fascinating to me. Okay, and you and I were talking earlier in your previous life, kind of in the private sector, so to speak, in pond management and fisheries management, you would not only recommend, but you do a lot of the work. And now, as you know, with the agency, you advise, and sometimes, most times, a private owner does the work themselves, but you're in an advisory role. Do I have that right? And like, how would you describe the differences?
Yes, sir. So on the private side, what we would do is we would go out, we would evaluate it, we would write up a recommendation, and we would execute it.
Okay.
As far as private lands, in the role I'm in now, it's working with landowners to ID it, get a correct treatment recommendation, and then have them execute that recommendation. Okay. We still do a lot of vegetation treatments, but it's primarily on public bodies of water. Okay. Ross Barnett, Eagle Lake, some of the various state park lakes, state lakes.
Okay.
So that keeps us involved and still, keeping up with the most current herbicides that can be used, treatment rates, recommendations, things like that.
Okay. And when you say we, because you're not the only fisheries biologist involved with MDWFP, like what kind of staff are we talking about and people who work on that?
So for us, every one of our fisheries biologists is expected to conduct vegetation treatments on the lakes they're responsible for.
Okay.
We also have two gentlemen that work strictly on aquatic plant management.
Okay. So they're sort of the experts. They've got the experience on dealing with it.
Yes, sir. Both of them have been here 9-10 years, and they do a lot of our treatments primarily.
Do things, vegetation, other things like that, even different species of fish, do they transfer from one body to the other on the legs of birds? Is that a myth?
So there was some research done that showed, I believe there were some fish eggs that were viable after passing through the digestive system of some birds.
Okay.
So there are ways to transfer. You've got a lot of things that are designed to stick, and that's how that stuff gets moved around. So, But primarily what we see, especially with vegetation, is boats.
Boats.
So,
and what was the program you mentioned?
The Clean Drain Dry.
Yeah, Clean Drain Dry. Tell me about that.
So what that is cleaning your boat off, making sure you drain all the water out of your bilge, your live well, and then making sure it's dry. Aquatic vegetation requires some sort of moisture to persist. So letting that vessel dry out essentially desiccates that vegetation.
Okay.
And where this primarily becomes an issue is of things like giant salvinia, which is spread all across the southeast. And it only takes one piece of it to create an infestation. It can double itself every 3 to 14 days. So when you look at a lake, you may think one piece isn't that bad, but it's like that old saying where do you want $1 million today or do you want a penny that doubles every day for a year?
Yeah.
Well, next thing you know, you've got one piece, it's not bad. By the end of summer, your whole 26-acre lake may be covered.
Didn't we have a big problem with that on the Ross Barnett Reservoir like a few years ago to the point where we were like using flamethrowers to get rid of it?
I wasn't here for that, but yeah.
How about that?
That was a Ryan Jones project there. So.
Okay. Yeah, what would be an example of a success story in terms of fisheries management, and maybe even on a public body of water? I guess I was thinking, how do you measure the success of implementing a program or making a decision? Here's what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to get rid of this certain vegetation. And then how do you sort of measure the success of things like that? What would be the example of a success story?
So we have a couple of different things we go with. Some that we're trying to manage, some that we're trying to eradicate. On some of our state lakes, we have some native species that can be a little problematic. So what we do, we have what we call a fisheries management plan, and that's kind of where we keep track of all of our goals, our objectives, things like that. So we determine what would be an acceptable level, and then we shoot to maintain at that level. For something that's invasive, where we can, especially things like giant salvinia, complete eradication would be the measure of success we're going for.
You don't want to see any of it left, basically.
Correct, because if anything you leave is going to continue to replicate, and it's kind of like putting out dumpster fires. You squash it and it comes right back.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like some of it probably is never ending.
It very much is that way. We've here lately we found giant salvinia on 2 of our state lakes. Lake Tom Bailey, and then we're just here recently, Bill Waller. Okay. So we're trying to eradicate that.
And the boaters, again, that program, I get the words mixed up.
Clean, Drain, Dry.
Clean, Drain, Dry. They're a big part of helping.
Absolutely.
To get it done.
You're responsible for your equipment there, and you want to make sure salvinia can get blown in the wind. You can launch out of a ramp that doesn't have anything present, and then by the time you come back, it's everywhere. So it can get on your bunks and your bilge. I've seen it in your live wells. I've heard reports out of Arkansas where that showed up in a crawfish sack. So just making sure that's your equipment's clean prior to you putting it in another body of water is huge.
Well, and some of that too. The challenge for you is an education sort of, I guess, initiative, isn't it, to get fishermen and those of us who are outdoorsmen using these bodies of water to hear that message. Not only, we can't implement it if we don't hear about it. So part of that is an ongoing effort too, is to put the word out.
Yes, sir. There's several programs. I believe we've got some marketing material that's related to that. I've seen states that have signage on the side of the interstates with it. So just trying to get that out there, because that's I can't put an exact number to it, but it's probably over $1 billion problem.
Oh yeah, wow.
with aquatic invasives.
How about that? Okay, so this is jumping around a little bit, but you and your line of work, you've been involved in the electroshock.
Yes,
before that's always been fascinating to me. And many, many, many years ago, 20-something years ago, I got to do that or go on a trip with Larry Pugh. I think it was at Lake Monroe, again, years ago, and kind of witness it, the electroshocking thing. So just purely out of curiosity, what's the most interesting thing that has ever come to the surface on an electroshocking trip?
Probably the most interesting thing for me is we were testing a piece of equipment on Ross Barnett, and we were in fairly shallow water and trying to get it dialed in, and I looked over, and right at my leg, which is a side console boat, was an alligator that was every bit of about 12 or 13 foot.
And, my gosh.
And he came up off the bottom and just kind of, he was obviously getting shocked, but we got off the pedal as soon as we realized it, but he just surfaced right there at my side.
12-foot alligator. Well, okay, so I'm thinking you spent a lot of time in Louisiana, the Mississippi River, Red River, in that area. You're no stranger to alligators. You've seen them, been around them.
Yes, sir. We would get them in our yard when I was a kid. So,
but still, one just popping up on the surface right next to you within arm's length.
Yes, sir. It was an experience, because my first thought was, if we get off the pedal and he comes to, is he coming into my lap?
Because he's that close.
He's that close.
So, pardon the pun here, but he was shocked, but you were a little shocked also.
Absolutely.
Was an alligator. Okay, but did that electroshock, did it affect the alligator the same way it does a fish, in that it stuns it to the surface, or no? That's
basically what he did.
Okay.
It kind of involuntary muscle movement there, and he just kind of floated up. We weren't in but probably 3 foot of water.
Okay.
So it was probably more so him just kind of lifting himself off the bottom.
Okay, and same way with the fish, it doesn't hurt them.
It doesn't. We run DC, which typically stuns them. The way we explain it when we're talking to groups is it's kind of like with a child. When they do something they're not supposed to, and the parent uses the full name, just kind of stops them, and they look like, what's going on? And then they go right back to what they were doing.
I got you. So, largest, again, out of pure curiosity, biggest largemouth you've ever shocked up?
So biggest I had was we were shocking some private property in East Texas, and we had 2 9-pounders come off one brush pile.
The same brush pile.
Same brush pile.
Private?
Yes, sir, private.
Okay.
So we typically don't see the bigger fish in electro fishing just because what they're going to do when we shock is they're going to be further offshore than our equipment's able to get.
Okay.
So typically with depending on our water quality, we can shock about 6 foot in each direction and maybe 6 foot deep.
Okay.
And those fish just don't hang out in that habitat.
So you're telling me that if I want to catch bigger fish, to fish deeper? Is that what you're saying?
Depending on the time of the year.
Yeah.
Those fish didn't get that big messing up.
Yeah, hanging around and not being smart and all that kind of stuff.
So if you look at with the advances in forward facing sonar,
Oh yeah.
your folks that are really heavy bass fishing are moving further and further offshore, looking because they're able to see those fish that are now suspended that they may not have necessarily seen before.
Right. Targeting fish that you'd never stop and make that cast without it.
Correct.
Basically.
And you see that with like the OH Ivies, where they're catching the big fish out there. Most of those guys are fishing well offshore, deeper water.
Deeper water. All right, I'm going to continue. Crappie. Biggest one you'd ever shocked up there?
Crappie. So I think that was probably going to be about a 2.5 pounder off Eagle Lake.
Okay, which is pretty good size.
It was a good fish.
Yeah.
So we see a lot of quality fish from over there and on Ross Barnett. Crappie are really difficult to shock because they typically, just like the bigger bass, hang out where our equipment can't get them.
Yeah.
But you time it just right. Sometimes in the spring and in the fall, you can find them up shallow and do really well catching some of the bigger ones to get good data.
If someone listening is going, well, why do they do that? Why do they shock them up? What do they do with them when they shock them? Explain that, like the purpose of that and that process.
Yes, sir. So with electrofishing, it's to get various different metrics related to the population, maybe size, structure, weight, relative weights, which is, they did a study some years ago where they decided that a fish of a certain length should weigh a certain weight. And that's called a relative weight, and that's kind of a condition factor. And so we're able to get that data, length frequencies, as I mentioned. We're able to see overall species composition, so what type of fish are there. And the reason we use the electrofishing vessel is because it's a lot faster than hook and line.
Sure.
Because most days I go fishing, I'll be honest, I may catch 1 or 2.
Yeah.
To get a good sample, we need to be upwards of 100. And it's kind of available to where, say, if you wanted to sample a pond, you would have to go out for a little bit, fish for bluegill, fish for red ear, fish for catfish, fish for largemouth. The electrofishing vessel stuns all of them, and we're able to pick them up and get a composite sample in a relatively short amount of time.
It's much more efficient.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
it may not be as fun as hook and line, but it's much more efficient.
That it is. So
Yeah.
we typically run either a 15 or 20-minute survey, and we would collect the same amount of data that you would if you were fishing in maybe 3 or 4 weeks.
So on one of those boats, electrofishing, how many people are involved when you go out?
So we typically run 2 people, operator and a netter, and that's based on our standard procedure. Depending on what we're doing, if we're doing a standardized survey, that's what we do. We have some other stuff where we're trying to collect, certain species such as blue cat or flathead. We've done some electrofishing for those for genetic analysis through southeastern Louisiana. So we were strictly targeting those species. Same with some striped bass. So typically, if we're doing that, we may put 2 people on the front of the boat just to improve our chances of collecting those fish.
Gotcha. All right. So biggest flathead you shocked up?
We got one out of the Pearl River Gates earlier this year that I think my scale goes to 40 pounds, and it gave me an error.
Okay.
So
we know it was over 40. And you mentioned blue cat as well.
Yes, sir.
What about those?
So we've had them in that 30 to 40 pound range.
30 to 40.
But most of the time we're getting the ones that are 7 to 10 pounds.
Yeah.
And I said that was for a genetic study that southeastern Louisiana was doing.
you mentioned, experience on the Mississippi River and grew up close to it. But I was watching, I guess, last year, and I guess we're going to have it again this year, the big catfish tournament that Bill Dance brought to Vicksburg. They're going to have one there and then have it in Memphis. And those guys were weighing in 60 and 70 pound blue cats that they caught in that river. And I guess those are not necessarily the biggest ones that could be caught in that river.
Oh, there's some out there. You hear the stories they claim that the divers went down and saw the fish as big as Volkswagens.
Yeah.
Those are going to more than likely be the blue cats. The state record was caught in the Mississippi River, I think, last year.
Yeah.
At just over 130.
Right, which, no offense at all, Chip, but that nearly is your size. Bitch, to be 100, if we're being real. It's really, and that's the thing too, as we talk about this, it's just species after species, different type of body of water. When you look at our state, you look at South Mississippi and areas close to the coast, from brackish water to then Mississippi River to private ponds to deep, clear reservoir Bay Springs to Ross Barnett, flat and shallow and lily pads and everything. And all the species, the state of Mississippi has so many good fisheries and so many different opportunities. And sure, there are others, but it's right up there with anywhere else in the country, isn't it, in terms of just what's available to you if you like to fish in the state of Mississippi?
Absolutely. There's tons of different options. Like you mentioned, you've got Pickwick up north, all the way to the marshes and bays on the coast, the offshore, the Mississippi Sound, the deeper rivers like the Mississippi, the Yazoo, where you can catch catfish, the flood control reservoirs, where you're going to catch your big crappie.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, absolutely. We didn't even mention that, but those crappie lakes, Enid and Arcabutla and Grenada, where people are from all over the country are coming there to catch crappie, where 2.5 pounds might not even be, nearly the biggest one that you see that particular day coming off one of those lakes.
It's very easy for them to find some 3+ pound fish up there.
Absolutely, it is. Okay, it made sense as you were talking about. You gave an example of one of the ways that you study with the electroshocking is, per length, how much do they weigh? There's a certain, to be healthy, to be the most healthy, they need to weigh a certain amount per a certain length. So for you and getting data from like tournament fishing, what good is that data? Okay, because you may say, well, this fish, they weighed in a sack of 5 that weighed 30, or this many fish and they weighed that much. Then how does that equate for your research on bodies of water?
Yes, sir. So we do a tournament report. One of our biologists puts that together. So it kind of shows us trends. So we're able to take that data and see kind of which way that fishery's going based on that. Tournament data can be tough. The last couple of years on Barnett, it seemed like every Friday we got a cold front. We had high flows, muddy water. This year we've had some really good weekends to fish. We've seen some exceptional bags as far as getting fish, 5 fish, 20 pounds, 28 pounds. So it really lets us see kind of what the fishery's doing, and no offense to the fishermen, but what they're catching may not be what my data's showing. So it gives us that comparison.
Right.
Because, a lot of these fish on Barnett are heavily pressured. They've seen everything the fishing owl has several times.
Right.
They may watch that spinnerbait and chatterbait go by and say, not today.
Right.
Whereas with the electro fishing boat, they really don't have a choice. So just because we can grow the big fish doesn't necessarily mean you can catch the big fish.
Right. That's why we call it fishing and not catching.
That's it.
And again, this is a really easy question, but I'm sure you probably get this sometimes too. As a fisheries biologist, do you get to go fishing a lot? Is that part of the job, or not rod and reel that much? So
with everything going on, with how busy we stay in my region, I don't get to do a lot of fishing. It was kind of funny. The first time I got to go fishing this year was on vacation 2 weeks ago out of Orange Beach. I joke with some guys that, I'd like to get back into doing some tournament fishing, but I feel like I'd have an unfair advantage. But then I think to myself, I still can't catch the fish on a lure. So,
yeah, well, that's good. Just out of curiosity. But in terms of a passion for the outdoors, a passion for fishing, managing it, you're kind of right where you want to be?
Absolutely. This was the career path that, when I was a kid, I wanted to do. Didn't know which way I wanted to go once I kind of got into it, but I knew wildlife and fisheries was where I wanted to be. Grew up hunting, fishing, still hunt, try to fish when I can, try to instill that passion in my little boy. So
yeah, that's great. Last thing for me, Buford, if someone's listening and let's say they are maybe a new landowner, maybe they have a private body of water, and for the first time they're thinking, you know what, this is going on there, or I saw this type of vegetation, and they're listening to this thinking, okay, I need to call someone, I need to reach out. What steps do they take? Where do they go first?
So we, MDWFP.com, we have a pond assistance tab on there you can click on. It's got a lot of resources. There's a managing small impoundments booklet that's written for landowners. They can also, our email addresses, our office phone are on there. They can get in touch with us. We can help them out that way. The main thing I say is if you're a new landowner, just getting a body of waters to fish it. That's the biggest thing we see with a lot of ponds and lakes in Mississippi, especially our private ones, is they're just not fished enough.
Well, and I would just like to say, if that's the case for anyone listening, I'm available. I'm happy to come help you fish it. If you just need an extra set of hands, I'm happy to. And you too, maybe you can get a day off. And we'll go.
Absolutely.
We'll go up there together. Buford, it's great to meet you, and thanks for telling us a little bit about what you do.
Yes, sir.
He is Buford Lessley, Fisheries Biologist at MDWFP. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you outdoors.